Oh boy. Hey, what's up, YouTube people? Shaggy the Writer coming at you live with our unofficially 6th edition, but officially 5th edition of a reading of Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist with the absolute most painful voices that have been basically making my throat hurt all day today on top of my usual allergies. Well, last night there was a near miss from a tornado. Uh, just happened to be the very bottom of or the very top of Tornado Alley up here, so this is kind of what happens sometimes. Though thankfully not super frequently, and there is a basement. No property damage. One trash can got knocked over, and everything is cool today and a little bit breezy. So uh, I'm gonna try and do at least a few chapters. I'm gonna take off from the top of the last page that I stopped at last night before the storm interrupted everything, and hopefully the voices don't hurt me. But I did watch a little Monty Python this morning just to make sure that I could do a halfway decent Cockney for everybody. So anyway, like, share, consider subscribing. From the top of page 98 of chapter 14, which is titled I keep getting tripped up on silly words that should not even bother me at all. But comprising further particulars of Oliver's stay at Mr. Brownlow's with the remarkable prediction which one Mr. Grimwig uttered concerning him when he went out on an errand. So I'm just going to give a big shout out to Fishy, to DWC, Dog Rose, and Tom, the four of whom have all made a point of stopping by and being here for multiple of these streams with me, as well as a huge, gracious shout out to my friend Against the World G, who is probably watching these with the company of Chris the Fresh. So I've put links to everybody's channels in the description already, except for Tom, just because I guess I should in this video. I just actually happened to notice that he's been watching these after the fact. So shouts out Tom. Oh, I shouldn't salute. That's not actually appropriate. But anyway, kicking off from chapter 14, page 98, the top of the page. Oh, no, indeed. It didn't worry me, Mum, said Oliver. I liked to see it. I quite well loved it. Well, said the old lady good-humoredly. Ooh, I don't got the old lady right today at all. You get where as fast as you can, dear. It is shall we hug up again. There, I'll promise you that. Now let us talk about something else. This was all the information that Oliver could obtain about the picture at that time. As the old lady had been so kind to him in his illness, he endeavored to think that no more of his subject just then, so he listened attentively to a great many stories she told him about an amiable and handsome daughter of hers, who was married to an amiable and handsome man and lived in the country, and about a son who was clerk to a merchant in the West Indies, and who was also such a good young man, and wrote such dutiful letters home 4 times a year that it brought the tears into her eyes to talk about them. When the old lady had expatiated a long time on the excellences of her children, and on the merits of her kind good husband besides, who had been dead and gone, poor dear soul, just 26 years, it was time to have tea, and after tea she began to teach Oliver cribbage, which he learnt as after at that which he learnt as quickly as she could teach, and at which game he played with great intensity and gravity until it was time for the invalid to have some warm wine and water with a slice of dry toast, and then go cozily to bed. They were happy days, those of Oliver's recovery, Everything was so quiet and neat and orderly, everybody so kind and genteel, that the noise and turbulence in the midst of which he had always lived, it seemed like heaven itself. He was no sooner strong enough to put his clothes on properly than Mr. Brownlow caused a complete new suit and new cap and new pair of shoes to be provided for him, and asked to sell them to a Jew and keep the money for herself. This she very readily did. The and as Oliver looked out the parlor window and saw the Jew roll them up in a bag and walk away, he felt quite delighted to think they were safely gone and that there was no possible danger of his ever being able to wear them again. They were sad rags, to tell the truth, and Oliver had never had a new suit before. To whoever's awesome enough to be watching right now, if you have like any questions about the plot or the character motivations or anything up until this point, or if you're just waiting to hear me do stupid voices, then you are definitely welcome to make whatever comments you please and ask any questions that you might have, because this is like a really casual, laid back thing today. Um, and I'm really just trying to see how many chapters I can get through before I go hoarse for everybody. So, didn't mean to scare you off. Uh,
Bless us and save us. Wash your hands and let me butter your hair nicely for you, child,
said Mrs. Bedwin.
Dear heart alive, if we hadn't known we would have us for you, we would have put a clean collar on and made you as smart as a sixpence.
Oliver did as the old lady bade him, and although she lamented grievously meanwhile that there was not even time to cripple the little frill that bordered the collar shirt, he looked so delicate and handsome, despite. Oh, come on now. My phone is being silly, so I guess I'm not listening to music, and I don't know how to give credit to the Cleveland show in the background. So hopefully it's down low enough that no one hears that it's the Cleveland show in the background and gets mad. Oh boy, this is why I can't keep a stream going with a bunch of people, because only a few people can really stand how annoying I actually am. Hey, let's just, I'm just here to enjoy myself. So Oliver did as the lady bade him, and although she lamented grievously meanwhile that there was not even time to crimple the little frill that bordered his shirt collar, he looked so delicate and handsome despite that important personal advantage that she went so far as to say, looking at him with great complacency from head to foot, that she really didn't think it would have been possible on the longest notice to have made much difference in him for the better. Thus encouraged, Oliver tapped at the study door. On Mr. Brownlow calling him to come in, he found himself in a little back room quite full of books, with a window looking at some pleasant little gardens. There was a table drawn up before the window, at which Mr. Brownlow was seated reading. When he saw Oliver, he pushed the book away from him and told him to come near the table and sit down. Oliver complied, marveling where the people could be fond to read such a great number of books as seemed to be written to make the world wiser, which is still a marvel to more experienced people than Oliver Twist every other day of their lives. "Those are a good many books, are they not, my boy?" said Mr. Brownlow, observing the curiosity with which Oliver surveyed the shelves that reached from the floor to the ceiling.
Great number, sir, replied Oliver. I never saw so many.
"You shall raise him if you behave well," said the gentleman kindly. "You shall look at better than looking at the outsides that is, in some cases, because there are no books, of which the backs and covers are by far the best parts." Oh, wait, I'm supposed to be doing him like super old. Ugh, consistency, Shaggy. um, That is, in some cases, because they are books, of which the backs and covers are by far the best parts.
I suppose they are the heavy ones, sir.
said Oliver, pointing to some large quartos with a good deal of gilding about the binding. Not always so, said the old gentleman, patting Oliver on the head and smiling as he did so. There are equally so heavy ones. They're of a much smaller size. How should you like to grow up a clever man and write books, eh?
I think I would rather read them, sir.
Replied Oliver. What? Wouldn't you like to be a book writer? Said the old gentleman. Oliver considered a little while, and at last said he shouldn't think it would be a much better thing to be a bookseller, upon which the old gentleman laughed heartily and declared he had said a very good thing, which Oliver felt glad to have done, though he by no means knew what it was. Well, well, said the old gentleman, composing his features, don't be afraid. We won't make an author of you. Well, there's an honest trade to be learnt, or brick making going on.
Thank you, sir,
said Oliver. At the earnest manner of his reply, the old gentleman laughed again, and said something about a curious instinct which Oliver, not understanding, paid no very great attention to. Now, said Mr. Brownlow, speaking, if possible, on a kinder but at the same time much more serious manner than Oliver had ever known him assume yet, I want to pay great attention, my boy, to what I'm going to say. I shall talk to you without any reserve, because I am sure you are as well able to understand me as many older persons would be.
Oh, don't tell me you're going to send me away, sir, pray,
exclaimed Oliver, alarmed at the serious tone of the old gentleman's commencement.
Don't turn me out of the doors to wander in the streets again. Let me stay here and be a servant. Don't send me back to the wretched place I came from. Have mercy upon a poor boy, sir.
My dear child, said the old gentleman, moved by the warmth of Oliver's sudden appeal, you need not be afraid of my deserting you, unless you give me cause.
I never, never will, sir,
interposed Oliver. Oh, I hope not, rejoined the old gentleman. I don't think you ever will. I've been deceived before in the objects of whom endeavoured to benefit, but I strongly propose to trust you nevertheless, and I'm more interested in your behalf than I can well account for even to myself. These persons on whom I have bestowed my dearest love lie in their graves, but although the happiness and delight of my love life buried there too, I have not made a coffin of my heart and sealed it up forever on my best affections. Deep affliction has but strengthened and refined them. As the old gentleman said this in a low voice, more to himself than to his companion, and as he remained silent for a short time afterwards, Oliver sat quite still. Well, well, said the old gentleman at length, in a more cheerful tone, I only say this because you have a young heart. Knowing that I have suffered great pain and sorrow, you will be more careful, perhaps, not to wound me again. You say you are an orphan without a friend in the world. All the inquiries I have been able to make confirm this statement. Let me hear your story, where you come from, who brought you up, and how many. I'm kind of glad there's no one watching right now. I'm doing terrible today. How you got into the company in which I found you. Speak the truth, and you shall not be friendless while I live. Oliver's sobs checked his utterance for some times. When he was up to the point of the beginning to relate how he had been brought up at reset. Oliver's sobs checked his utterance for some moments while he was on the beginning to relate how he had been brought up at the farm and carried to the workhouse by Mr. Bumble. A particularly impatient little double knock was heard at the street door, and a servant running upstairs announced Mr. Grimwig. "Is he coming up?" inquired Mr. Brownlow, not Barlow, Brownlow. "Yes, sir," replied the servant. "He asked if there were any muffins in the house, and when I told him yes, he said he had come to tea." Mr. Brownlow smiled, and returning to Oliver, said that Mr. Grimwig was an old friend of his, and he must not mind his being a little rough in his manners, for he was a worthy creature at bottom, as he had reason to know.
Shall I go upstairs, sir?
Inquired Oliver. "No," replied Mr. Brownlow, "I would rather you remained here." At this moment there walked into the room, supporting himself by a thick stick, a stout gentleman, rather lame in one leg, who was dressed in the blue coat, striped waistcoat, nankeen breeches and gaiters, and a broad brimmed white hat with the sides turned up in green. A very small plaited shirt frill stuck out from his waistcoat, and a very long steel watch chain with nothing but the end dangerously below it. With nothing but a key at the end dangerously below it. Oh boy. Um, Let me see. Did I really just lose my place that easily? That's just a really dope description of the guy. The ends of his white neckerchief were twisted into a ball about the size of an orange. The variety of shapes into which his countenance was twisted defied description. He had a manner of screwing his head to one side when he spoke, and looking out of the corners of his eyes at the same time, which irresponsibly reminded the beholder of a parrot. In this attitude he fixed himself the moment he made his appearance, and holding out a small piece of orange peel at arm's length, exclaimed in a growling, discontented voice, "Look here, you say this. Isn't it a most wonderful, extraordinary thing that I call at a man's house, but I find a piece of his poor surgeon friend on the staircase?" I have to get my dog in, and I think I'm going to get myself some more tea. Uh, I was going to wait till the end of the chapter for the tea, actually. So I'm just going to get my dog in and be right back. So, it's good for a dog to be outside for a little bit, but when they're asking to come in, if it's an indoor dog, you got to let them in. Just kind of facts. It's cruel not to. Well, not really. I mean, some dogs really are just well adapted to being outdoors, and then you just kind of bring them in at night and make sure that they've got shade when it's hot out, because they'd probably be rather in some shade asleep somewhere when it's hot out than be in your stuffy house. Yeah. Important to brush dogs, walk dogs, make sure that they eat good food, and take them to the vet like once a year, and also whenever there's any type of issue that you're noticing. Vets are pretty awesome usually. Google reviews though. Okay. I've
I've been lamed with orange peel once, and ought to know orange peel will be my death at last, I will, sir. Orange peel will be my death, or I'll be content to eat my own head, sir.
With this handsome offer, with which Grimwig backed and confirmed nearly every assertion he made, it was the more singular. That's not even a hard word in his case, because admitting for the sake of argument the possibility of scientific improvements ever being brought to the pass which will enable a gentleman to eat his own head in the event of his being so disposed. Mr. Grimwig's head was such a particularly large one that the most sanguine man alive could hardly entertain a hope of being able to get through it at a sitting, to put entirely out of the question a very thick coating of powder.
Oh, eat my head, sir,
Repeated Mr. Grimwig, striking his stick upon the ground,
Hello, what's that?
looking at Oliver and retreating a pace or two.
This young Oliver Twist, whom we were speaking about,
Said Mr. Brownlow. Oliver bowed.
You don't mean to say that's the boy who had the fever, I hope,
Said Mr. Grimwig, recoiling some more.
Wait a minute, don't speak, stop,
Continued Grimwig, abruptly losing all dread of the fervor in his triumph at the discovery.
That's the boy who had the orange. If that's not the boy, sir, who had the orange and threw this bit of peel not on the staircase, I'll eat my head and his too. No, he's not that one,
Said Mr. Brownlow, laughing.
Come, put down your hat and speak to my young friend. I feel strongly on this subject, sir,
Said the irritable old gentleman, drawing off his gloves.
There's always more or less orange peel on the pavement of our street, and I know it's put there by the surgeon's boy at the corner. A young woman stumbled over a bit last night and fell against my garden railings. Directly she got up and I saw her look towards his infernal red lamp with the pantomime light. Don't go to him, I called out of the window. He's an assassin, a mantrap. So he is, if he is not.
Here the irrescarable. Oh, God, that's a word I actually have to look up. Irrescarable old gentleman gave a great knock on the ground with his stick, which he was always understood by his friends to imply the customary offer whenever it was not expressed in words. Then, still keeping his stick with his hand, he sat down, and opening a double eyeglass which he wore attached to a broad-rimmed riband, took a view of Oliver, who, after seeing that he was but the object of inspection, colored and bowed again.
That's the boy, is it?
Said Mr. Grimwig at length.
That's, that's the boy,
Replied Mr. Brownlow.
How are you, boy?
Said Mr. Grimwig.
Great deal better, thank you, sir,
Replied Oliver. Mr. Brownlow seemed to apprehend that his singular friend was about to say something disagreeable, asked Oliver to step down stairs and tell Mrs. Bedwin they were ready for tea, which, as he did not half like the visitor's manner, he was very happy to do.
He is a nice looking boy, is he not?
Inquired Mr. Brownlow.
I don't know,
Replied Mr. Grimwig pettishly.
Don't know? No, I don't know. I've never seen any difference in boys. I only know two sorts of boys, mealy boys and beef-faced boys. And which is Oliver? Mealy. I know a friend who has a beef-faced boy, a fine boy they call him, with a round head and red cheeks and glaring eyes, a horrid boy, with a body and limbs appear to be swelling out of the seams of his blue clothes, with the voice of a pilot, and the appetite of a wolf. Oh, I know him, the wretch.
Come, said Mr. Brownlow, these are not the characteristics of young Oliver Twist, so he needn't excite your wrath.
No, they are not,
replied Mr. Grimwig.
He may have worse.
Here Mr. Brownlow coughed impatiently, which appeared to afford Mr. Grimwig the most exquisite delight.
He may have worse, I say,
repeated Mr. Grimwig.
Where does he come from? Who is he? What is he? He has had a fever. What of that? Fevers are not particularly to good people, are they? Bad people have fevers sometimes, don't they, eh? I knew a man who was hung in Jamaica for murdering his master. He had a fever 6 times. He wasn't recommended to mercy on that account. Pooh, nonsense. No, the fact was that in the innermost recesses of his own heart, Mr. Grimwig strongly disposed to admit that Oliver's appearance and manner were usually prepossessing, but he had a strong appetite for contradiction, sharpened on this occasion by finding of the orange peel and inwardly determining that no man should dictate to him whether a boy was well looking or not.
Oh my god, I just did that in the Goy's voice, and that's just the narrator voice. Had he resolved from the first opposite of his friend, when Mr. Brownlow admitted that on no one point of the inquiry could he yet return a satisfactory answer, that he had postponed any investigation into Oliver's previous history until he thought the boy was strong enough to bear it. Mr. Grimwig chuckled maliciously, and he demanded with a sneer whether the housekeeper was in the habit of counting at the plate at night, because if she didn't find a tablespoon or two missing some sunshiny morning, why he would be content to there's just a big blank and so forth. I feel like that's a curse word, but I don't know which curse word that's supposed to be. Unless he was just a big pause there and then he said it. He couldn't think of anything he'd be content to do. He just said,
and so forth.
All of this, Mr. Brownlow, although himself somewhat of an impetuous gentleman, knowing his friend's peculiarities, bore with great good honor, as Grimwig at tea was graciously pleased to express his entire approval of the muffins. Matters went on very smoothly, and Oliver, who had made one of the party, began to feel more at his ease than he had yet done in the fierce old gentleman's presence.
And when are you going to hear a full, true, peculiar account of the life and adventures of Oliver Twist?
Asked Grimwig of Mr. Brownlow. At the conclusion of the meal, looking sideways at Oliver, he resumed the subject.
Tomorrow morning,
replied Mr. Brownlow.
I would rather you was alone with me at the time. Come up to me tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, my dear.
Yes, sir,
replied Oliver. He answered with some hesitation because he was confused by Grimwig's looking at him so hard at him.
I tell you what,
whispered the old gentleman to Mr. Brownlow.
He won't come up to you tomorrow morning, or saw him hesitate. He's deceiving you, my good friend. I swear he is not,
replied Mr. Brownlow warmly.
If he is not, said Mr. Grimwig, oh, fuck off.
And down went the stick.
I'll answer for that boy's life with my truth,
said Mr. Brownlow, knocking the table.
And for his falsehood with my head,
rejoined Mr. Grimwig, knocking the table also.
We shall see,
said Mr. Brownlow, checking his rising anger.
We will,
repeated Mr. Grimwig with a provoking smile. We will. As fate would have it, Mrs. Bedwin chanced to bring in at this moment a parcel of small books which Mr. Brownlow had that morning purchased of the identical bookstall keeper, who was already figured in his history, having laid them at the table. She prepared to leave the room.
Stop that boy, Mrs. Bedwin,
Said Mr. Brownlow.
there is something to go back.
Here he is, Gordon, sir.
Replied Miss Bedwin.
Call after him,
Said Mr. Brownlow.
it's particular. He is a poor man, and they are not paid for. There are some books to be taken back too.
The street door was opened. Oliver ran one way and the girl ran another, and Mrs. Bedwin stood on the step and screamed for the boy, but there was no boy in sight. Oliver and the girl returned in a breathless state to report that there were no tidings of him.
Dear me, I'm very sorry for that,
Exclaimed Mr. Brownlow.
I particularly wish those books to be returned tonight. Send Oliver with them,
Said Mr. Grimwig with an ironic smile.
he will be sure to deliver them safely, you know.
Yes, do let me take them if you please, sir.
Said Oliver.
I'll run all the way, sir.
The old gentleman was just going to say that Oliver should not go out on any account, with a most malicious cough came from Mr. Grimwig, determined him that he should, and that by his prompt discharge of the commission he should prove him the injustice of his suspicions on his head at least at once.
You shall go, my dear, said the old gentleman. The books are on a chair by the table. Fetch them down.
Oliver, delighted to be of use, brought down the books of his own arm in a great bustle, and waited, cap in hand, to hear what a message he was to take.
You are to say,
Said Mr. Brownlow, glancing steadily at Grimwig,
you are to say that you have been brought these books back, and that you have come to pay £4.10 I owe him. This is a £5 note, so you will have to bring me back 10 shillings change.
It won't be 10 minutes, sir.
replied Oliver eagerly. Having but toned up the banknote in his jacket pocket, he placed the books carefully under his arm, made a respectful bow, and left the room. Mrs. Bedwin followed him into the street door, giving him many directions about the nearest way, and the name of the bookseller, and the name of the street, all of which Oliver said he clearly understood, and having superadded many injunctions to be sure not take the cold, the old lady at length permitted him to depart.
Bless his sweet face,
Said the old lady, looking after him.
I can't bear somehow to let go of the sight of him.
At this moment Oliver looked gaily round, and nodded before he turned the corner. The old lady smiled and returned his salutation, and closed the door, went back to her own room.
Let me see. He'll be back in 20 minutes at the longest,
Said Mr. Brownlow, pulling out his watch and placing it on the table.
He will be locked by that time. Oh, you really expect him to come back, do you?
Inquired Mr. Grimwig.
Don't you?
Asked Mr. Brownlow, smiling. The spirit of contradiction was strong in Mr. Grimwig's breast at this moment, and it was reddened stronger by his friend's confident smile.
No, he said,
smiting the table with his fist.
I do not. The boy has a new suit of colours on his back, a valuable set of books under his arm, and a £5 note in his pocket.
Oh, fuck, I got the wrong guy. I've already said it once on this stream. I might as well say it again. No, he said, smiting the table with his,
I do not. The boy has got a new set of clothes on his back, valuable books under his arm, and a £5 note in his pocket. He'll join his old friends, the thieves, and laugh at you. If that boy ever returns to this house, sir, I'll eat my head.
With these words, he drew his chair closer to the table, and there the two friends sat, in silent expectation with the watch between them. It is worthy of remark as illustrating the importance we attached to our own judgments against the pride with which we put forth our most rash and hasty conclusions that although Mr. Grimwig was not by any means a bad-hearted man, and though he would not have been unfeignedly sorry to see his respected friend duped and deceived, he really did most earnestly and strongly hope at that moment that Oliver Twist might not come back. It grew so dark that the figures on the dial plate were scarcely discernible, but the two old gentlemen continued to sit in silence with the watch between them. Wow, I am actually kind of glad that I didn't try and get through all of that at 11 o'clock last night when it was storming. Another note, I really just saw that this um, last couple of streams that I did needed like a few hours to buffer and upload and everything. So I don't think these are going out like right after I'm done or even a few minutes after I'm done. It's more like the next day, which is not the best news, but I'll take it. At the moment, I am a full 36 minutes in. So I'm going to go have a cup of tea so that way I can do some of these more difficult voices because it is sincerely making my throat hurt a little bit. The life of a voice actor, I guess. Dang, these guys make money for a good reason. That's difficult. But, yeah, let me just know if there are any. I'm just typing something in here because before I get up and go. If anyone's willing to sit through this, I greatly appreciate it. But I definitely appreciate everyone that's been showing up for these streams pretty regularly. Let's see. There has been Oh yeah, I really do want to say something too, because last night I was watching Red from the Overly Sarcastic Productions do a stream where she was reading a book called Guards, which is like a fantasy novel that was actually really dope. And I managed to throw a couple silly ass comments in her chat, so I enjoyed that quite a bit. There we go. I should have probably used. I probably should have like actually spelled out everybody's names appropriately, but they know who they are. The usual crowd has been pretty awesome. I've had some people who've like actually come after the fact and said stuff about how they watched the whole video in the comments, and that's really dope. And also in person. These are getting a surprising number of views, and I'm loving it because all I'm doing is just reading these books for y'all, and this one book for y'all. I haven't even done anything but Oliver Twist. And just the fact that we have actually gotten like a third of the way through Oliver Twist is pretty awesome. That's my goal today. We're trying to reach like kind of at least close to the halfway mark. So that way these don't have to go on forever. But then at the end of this, I'll have a whole collection of the audiobook of Oliver Twist. Nah, man, I might have to if I actually blow up off of these, or if even if people discover this once I get monetized in the future. Knock on wood. Ah, there's no wood over here. There you go. Is that me or is that something outside? I have to get up now. Um, Hang on one sec. I promise I will be right back. Thank you so much for anyone who tunes in. I don't get the updates right away, so I definitely appreciate you stopping by. He's good though. Oh. Get the down to the wild, creeping and crawling. You can get y'all ain't even talking y'all. You motherfucking house like every day. Making Mr. Doctor drink like I think. For the record, that was made of like a bear. Oh, yes. Da 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 da. Do 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 do. Ba down. Yes, look at you. Look at you. You're so pink. You're so pink. Yeah. Pretty dogs. Stinky dogs. Oh, yeah. All right. Oh, boy. Oh, I think it's spelled with a J, actually. Oh, no, that's not even funny, Shaggy. Come on. Ay vey. We're going to settle back in. I'm going to keep reading for you. Kind of surprised the usual crowd hasn't shown up at all. I wonder if it's anything going on. If I should post this a couple places. Anyway, yes, we're to anyone who is just tuning in. We are on chapter 15, shewing how fond of Oliver Twist the merry old Jew and Miss Nancy were. So, basically, we had so far. Oh no, let me just. Last time on Oliver Twist. Oliver being taken in by like super kind old people that he tried to steal from. Fell pretty ill, got better. They cared for him the whole time, got him off the hook with the law, and everything ended up pretty well for him. And now he is running around with. They said 5 pounds, but if you think about the fact that it's 1837 and a pound was like $5 or $6 when England was at the peak of their empire. And that's really saying something because it might have even been more like, so we're talking about number one, it's not $5. We'll call it like, it might have even been 10 times that because I was going to say $25, but at a certain point, it might have even been like $50. So he's walking around with $50 in his pocket at this point. He's got a whole bunch of books that are probably also valued at, you know, book prices today, even if they called them valuable books, though. They called them valuable books. Books today, little paperbacks and stuff still go, $15, $16. And hardcovers usually 20 or so. And textbooks for college is hundreds of dollars. I've been there. It's awful. But yeah, if you've never paid $120 for a book, you've never been to college. That's just a fact. So we'll just assume that he has the modern equivalent of $10,000 in his pocket. That's probably too much. We'll say 5 grand. We will say he has 5 grand in his pocket right now, between the cash and the books. Because, like I said, back then people made like a couple pounds a year. He just sent this kid off with like, someone's whole life savings in their mid to late 30s. So I don't know. I keep thinking I'm gonna go post this other places, and now it's just being terrible on my end because I am just procrastinating getting back reading into this because I know it's gonna kill my throat. It hurts. Um, Let me just see here. Do 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 do. Oh, overly sarcastic is streaming, so I'm probably gonna see that afterward. Actually, you know what? I am not gonna watch them play games when I got friends that I can watch play games on here because it's cool people. Huh. Sorry, I'm still just trying to share this link. If anyone is joining in, we are looking at chapter 15. So do 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 do. I'm gonna post this on Reddit actually too while I'm at it. So if anyone joins me from the Charles Dickens stream, the Charles Dickens thread. Ooh. Now I'm gonna get back into it just out of love. Um, Definitely gonna do this for a good while today too. So let's see. Chapter 15, showing how fond of Oliver Twist the merry old Jew and Miss Nancy were. In the obscure parlor of the low public house situate in the filthiest part of Little Saffron Hill, a dark and gloomy den where a flaring gas light burnt all day in the winter time, and where no ray of sun ever shone in the summer, there sat brooding over a little pewter measure in a small glass, strongly impregnated with the smell of liquor, a man in a velveteen coat, drab shorts, half boots and stockings, with whom, even by the dim light, no experienced agent of police would have hesitated for one instant to recognize as Mr. William Sykes. Oh God, I hate this voice. Evan Bill Sykes.
Keep quiet, you wommage. Keep quiet,
Said Mr. Sykes, suddenly breaking silence, whether his meditations were so intense as to be disturbed by the dog's winking, or whether his feelings were so wrought upon his reflections that they required all the relief derivable from kicking an offending animal to allay them, is matter for argument and consideration. Whether was the cause the effect was a kick and a curse bestowed upon the dog simultaneously. Dogs are not generally apt to revenge injuries inflicted upon them by their masters, but Mr. Sykes's dog, having faults of temper in common with his owner, and laboring perhaps at this moment under a powerful sense of injury, made no more ado but at once fixed his teeth into one of the half boots. Having given it a hearty shake, he retired growling under a form, thereby just escaping the pewter measure which Mr. Sykes levelled at his head.
You would you?
Said Sykes, seizing the poker in one hand and deliberately opening with the other a large clasp knife which he drew from his pocket.
Come here, you born devil! Come here, d'ye hear?
The dog no doubt heard, because Mr. Sykes spoke in a very harshest key of the very harshest voice, but appearing to some uncertain accountable objection to having his throat cut, he remained where he was, and growled more fiercely than before, at the same time grasping the end of the poker between his teeth, and biting it like a wild beast. Good doggy, forget this guy, man. Neutral evil, jeez. Maybe chaotic evil, even. I mean, I'm not even sure how I'm going to do this character chart. The resistance only infuriated Mr. Sykes more, because of course it did. Who, dropping on his knees, began to assail the animal most furiously. The dog jumped from right to left and left to right, snapping and growling with the struggle was reaching its most crucial point, one of the other, when, the door suddenly opening, the dog darted out, leaving Bill Sykes with the poker and the clasp knife in his hands. There must always be two parties to a quarrel, says the old adage, Mr. Sykes, being disappointed of his dog's participation, at once transferred with his share in the quarrel of the newcomer.
What the devil do you come in between me and my dog for?
Said Sykes with a fierce gesture.
Oh, no.
Oh, I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't have started doing his voice like this, but since I've already dug my hole. I don't know, my dear, I don't know, replied Fagin humbly, for the Jew was a newcomer.
Don't know, you whatever thief,
growled Sykes.
Couldn't you hear the noise?
No, the sound of it is I'm a living man, Bill, replied the Jew.
Oh, no, you hear nothing, you don't,
retorted Sykes with a fierce sneer.
Stinking in and out, and so nobody hears how you come a go, or wish you'd been to your fighting half a minute ago.
Why? Inquired the Jew with a forced smile.
'Cause your government as cares for yours of such men as you as haven't half the pluck, 'cause lets a man kill a dog how he likes,
replied Sykes, shutting up his knife with a very expressive look.
That's why.
The Jew rubbed his hands, sitting down at the table, affected to laugh at the pleasantry of his friend. He was obviously very ill at ease, however. God, that one's not even that hard. 19th century mannerisms just sound very different from 20th century ones, so it's kind of hard to keep it straight sometimes.
Grin away,
said Sykes, replacing the poker and surveying him with savage contempt.
Grin away. You'll never have the laugh at me, though, unless it's behind your nightcap. I've got the upper hand on you, Fagin, and damn me, I'll keep it. There, if I go, you go. So take care of me.
Well, my dear, said the Jew. I know that we have mutual interest, Bill. A mutual interest. Humph, said Sykes, as if he thought the interest lay rather more on the Jew's side than his.
Well, what have you got to say to me?
It's all passed safe through the melting pot, replied Fagin, and this is your share. It's rather more than it ought to be, my dear, but as I know you'll do me good turn in another time, and
Stow that gammon,
imposed the robber impatiently.
where is it? Hand it over.
Yes, yes, Bill, give me time, replied the Jew soothingly. Here it is, all safe. As he spoke, he drew forth an old cotton handkerchief from his breast, untying a large knot in one corner, produced a small brown paper packet. Sikes, snatching it from him, hastily opened it, and proceeded to count the sovereigns it contained.
This is all, is it?
Inquired Sikes. All, replied the Jew.
You haven't opened your parcel and swallowed it one or two as you come along, have you?
Inquired Sikes suspiciously.
Don't put on an injured look at the question. You've done it many a time. Jerk the tinkler.
These words, in plain English, conveyed an injunction to ring the bell. It was answered by another Jew, younger than Fagin, but nearly as vile and repulsive in appearance. Bill Sikes merely pointed to the empty measure. The Jew, perfectly understanding the hint, retired to fit it, previously exchanging a remarkable look with Fagin, who raised his eyes for an instant as if expectation of it, and shook his head in reply so slightly that the action would have been almost imperceptible to an observant third person. It was not lost upon Sikes, who stood swooping at the moment to tie the boot lace which the dog had turned. Possibly, if he had observed the brief exchange of signals, he might have thought it boded not good to him. "Is anybody here, Barney?" inquired Fagin, speaking now that Sikes was looking out with raised his eyes from the ground.
Don't show,
Replied Barney, whose words, whether they came from the heart or not, made their way through the nose. "Nobody?" inquired Fagin in a tone of surprise, which was perhaps might mean that Barney was at liberty to tell the truth.
don't worry about Miss Daisy.
Replied Barney.
Nancy,
Exclaimed Sikes.
where? Strike me blind if I don't hear that girl her native talents.
"She'd better having their plate of wild beef I need to buy," said Barney.
Send her here,
Said Sikes, pouring out a glass of liquor.
send her here, Barney.
Barney looked timidly at Fagin. As for permission, the Jew remained silent, and not lifting his eyes from the ground, he retired and presently turned, ushering in Nancy, who was decorated with a bonnet, apron, basket, street door.
Why haven't you?
The young brat's ill and confined. Oh,
The young brat has been ill and confined to the crib, and
Nancy dear, said Fagin, looking up. Now, whether a peculiar contraction of the Jew's red eyebrows and a half closing of his deeply set eyes warned Miss Nancy that she was disposed to be too communicative. Communicative is not a matter of much importance. The fact is all we need care for here, and the fact is that she suddenly checked herself and, with several gracious smiles upon Mr. Sikes, turned the conversation to other matters. In about 10 minutes' time, Mr. Fagin was seized with a fit of coughing, upon which Nancy pulled her shawl over her shoulders and declared it was time to go. Mr. Sikes, finding that he was walking a short part of the way himself, expressed his intention of accompanying her, and they went away together, followed at a little distance by a dog who slunk out of the back yard as soon as his master was out of sight. The Jew thrust his head out of the room door when Sikes had left it, looked after him as he walked up the dark passage, shook his clenched fist, muttered a deep curse, and then, with a horrible grin, reseated himself at the table where he was soon deeply absorbed by the interesting pages of hue and cry. Meanwhile, Oliver Twist, little dreaming that he was so very within so very short a distance of the merry old gentleman, was on his way to the bookstall. When he got into Clerkenwell, he accidentally turned down a by street which was not exactly his way, but not discovering his mistake until he got halfway down it, and knowing it must lead in the right direction, he did not think it worth while to turn back, so he marched on as quickly as he could, with the books under his arm. He was walking along thinking how happy and contented he ought to feel, and how much he would give for only one look at poor little Dick, who, starved and beaten, might be weeping bitterly at the very moment when he was startled by a young woman screaming out loud,
Oh, my dear brother!
and he had hardly looked up to see what the matter was when he was stopped by having a pair of arms thrown around his neck.
Don't!
Cried Oliver, struggling.
Let go of me! Who is this? What are you stopping me for?
The only reply to this was a great number of loud lamentations from the young woman who had embraced him, and who had a little basket and street door key in her hand.
Oh, my gracious, said the young woman. I found him. Oh, Oliver, Oliver, oh, you naughty boy, to make me suffer such distress on your account. Come home, dear. Come, I've found him. Thank goodness heavens I've found him.
With these incoherent exclamations, the young woman burst into another fit of crying, and got so dreadfully hysterical that a couple of women came up at the moment, asked a butcher's boy with a shiny head of hair anointed with suet, I guess that's sweat, but it's spelled suet, who was also looking on, whether he didn't think he had better run for the doctor, to which the butcher's boy, who appeared of longing, not to say indolent disposition, replied that he thought not. Uh, so an hour in, and we've really only had like one viewer who was kind of on and off. It's not an issue at all for me. I'm just kind of getting spoiled, I guess, because I'm used to having 3, 4 viewers in these things. Um, but hey, at like any point in time, I mean, but hey, this is really dope. I'm just happy to be having an actual audience of people who are interested in literature. So,
Oh, no, no, never mind,
said the young woman, grasping Oliver's hand.
I'm better now. Come home directly, you cruel boy. Come. What's your matter, Mum?
Inquired one of the women.
Oh, oh, Mum,
Inquired the young woman.
he ran away near a month ago from his parents, who are hard-working and respectable people, who enjoy to send her thieves and bad characters, and almost broke his mother's heart. You wretch, said one woman. Go home, you little brute, said the other. I'm not, replied Oliver, greatly alarmed. I don't know her. I haven't any sister or father or mother either. I'm an orphan. I live at Pentonville. Oh, hear him, how he braves it out, cried the young woman. Why, it's Nancy, exclaimed Oliver, who now saw her face for the first time, and started back in irrepressible astonishment. You say he knows me, cried Nancy, appealing to the bystanders. He can't help himself. Make him come home, there's good people, or he'll kill his dear mother and father and break me heart. Oh, cool. It's a illustration. I love these.
Can't understate it enough. These are so dope. Um,
What the devil's this?
said a man, bursting out of a beer shop with a white dog at his heels.
Young Oliver, come home to your poor mother, you young dog. Come home directly.
I don't belong to them. I don't know them. Help! Help!
Cried Oliver, struggling in the man's powerful grasp.
Help?
Repeated the man.
Yes, I'll help you, you young rascal. What books are these? You've been stealing them, haven't you? Give me. With these words.
With these words, the man tore volumes from his grasp and struck him on the head.
That's right,
Cried a looker on from a garret window.
that's the only way of bringing him to his senses.
To be sure,
Cried a sleepy-faced carpenter, casting an approving look at the garret window.
It'll do him good,
Said the two women.
they shall have it too,
Rejoined the man, administering another blow and seizing Oliver by the collar.
Come on, you young villain. Here, Bullseye, mind him, boy, mind him.
Weak with recent illness, stupefied by the blows and the suddenness of the attack, terrified by the fierce growling of the dog and the brutality of the man, and overpowered by the conviction of the bystanders that he really was the hardened little wretch he was described to be, what could one poor child do? Darkness had set in, and it was a low neighborhood. No help was near, resistance was useless. In another moment he was dragged into a labyrinth of dark, narrow courts, and forced along them at a pace which rendered the few cries he dared give utterance to wholly intelligible. It was of little moment indeed whether they had in, it was of little moment indeed whether they were intelligible or no, for there was nobody to care for them. They had been ever so plain. The gas lamps were lighted. Mr. Bedouin was waiting anxiously at the open door. The servant had run up the street 20 times to see if there were any traces of Oliver, and still two old gentlemen sat perseveringly in that dark parlor with the watch house between them. So Oliver just got kidnapped, and because it's Victorian era London, they all encouraged it because they played it off like it was his shitty family and not, kids aren't capable of telling the truth, I guess. And that's where I really dealt with that as a kid. And I feel like fishing probably deals with that sometimes, where just because you don't ever want to believe you when you're right. So it's really important to try and fact check yourself. That being said, I had brewed up some tea before, so 2 seconds. And I will be right back. Ugh. Oh boy. I got 2 things of seaweed, 4 things of yogurt yesterday. And I'm already eating my last thing of seaweed, and I've only got one thing of yogurt in the fridge. Although I did share, to be fair. Ma Dukes had one. I've just been kind of really loving my healthy snacks. Oh boy. Feels good even though it's not quite as hot as I normally like it. Uh, it's really awesome when you get actual tea leaves, because when you get actual tea leaves, you can reuse them like 2, 3 times and it'll still have a good flavor to it. This is the third cup of tea that I made with Moroccan mint leaves. And at this point, it doesn't taste nearly as good as the first, but still good for me. And it's making my throat feel nice when I'm trying to do all these insane voices. So I've got tea and seaweed. La da 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 da. It's the one and only dear double G. Mm. Oh boy. Shouts out Dog Rose, I guess. Also shouts out the foes. Um, Big shouts out Dog Rose. Oh boy. Trying to get this open. Ah. Yes. Seaweed. Mhm. The narrow. Oh wait. Chapter 16 relates what became of Oliver Twist after he had been claimed by Nancy. The narrow streets and courts at length terminated in a large open space, scattered about which were pens for beasts and other indications of a cattle market. Sykes slackened his pace when they reached this spot, the girl being quite unable to support any longer the rapid rate at which they had hitherto walked. Turning to Oliver, and roughly commanded him to take hold of Nancy's hand. "Do you hear?" growled Sykes, as Oliver hesitated and looked round. They were in a dark corner, quite out of the track of the passengers. Oliver saw, but too plainly, that resistance would be of no avail. He held out his hand, which Nancy clasped tightly in hers. "Give me the other," said Sykes, squeezing Oliver's unoccupied hand. "Here, bourgeois." The dog looked up and growled. "See here, boy," said Sykes, putting his other hand to Oliver's throat. "If he speaks ever soft a word, hold him. Do you mind?" The dog growled again, and, licking his lips, eyed Oliver as if he were anxious to attach himself to his windpipe without delay. "He is as willing as a Christian struck me blind if he isn't," said Sykes, regarding the animal with a kind of grim and ferocious approval. Now you've got to expect, master, so carry away as quick as you like. The dog will soon stop the game. Get on, young'un." Bullseye wagged his tail in acknowledgment of this unusually endearing form of speech, and giving vent to another admonitory growl, for the benefit of Oliver, led the way onward. It was Smithfield that they were crossing, although it might have been Grosvenor Square. For anything Oliver knew to the contrary, the night was dark and foggy. The lights in the shops could scarcely struggle through the heavy mist, which thickened every moment and shrouded the streets and houses in gloom, rendering the single place still stranger in Oliver's eyes, and making his uncertainty the more dismal and depressing. They had hurried on a few paces when a deep church bell struck the hour. With its first stroke, two conductors stopped and turned their heads in the direction whence the sound proceeded.
8 o'clock, Bill,
Said Nancy when the bell ceased.
What's the good of telling me that? I can hear it, can't I?
Replied Sykes.
I wonder whether they can hear it.
Said Nancy.
Of course they can,
Replied Sykes.
it was bottomy time when I was stopped, and if there weren't a penny trumpeted affair, as I couldn't hear him squeaking on, I was locked up for the night. The roaring din outside made the thundering old tail so silent that I could have almost beat my head out against the iron plates of the door.
Poor fellows,
Said Nancy, who still had her face turned towards the quarter in which the bell had sounded.
Oh, Bill, such fine young chaps as them.
Yes, that's what women think of,
Answered Sykes.
fine young chaps. Well, they're as good as dead, so don't much matter.
With this consolation, Mr. Sykes appeared to repress a rising tendency to joyously, and clasping Oliver's wrist more firmly, told him to step out again. Ooh. Shit. We're doing great. Oh boy. Oh boy. I'm going to check my phone real quick. So, let me see what's up. They're streaming, they're streaming. Oh boy, D-Dubs has video content. That's dope. Oh, okay. I wonder if this is someone that he I guess dang, the Dutch have some good rappers, I guess. I don't know. Bro's lightweight. Shit is hell. Okay. Whew. Got my tea, got my seaweed. We killing it. Chapter 16 relates what became of Oliver Twist after he had been claimed by Nancy. The narrow streets and courts at length terminated in a large open space, scattered about which were pens for beasts and other indications of a cattle market. Sykes slackened his pace when they reached this spot, the girl being quite unable to support any longer the rapid rate at which they had hitherto walked. Turning to Oliver, he roughly commanded him to take hold of Nancy's hand.
Yeah,
Growled Sykes, as Oliver hesitated and looked around. Sykes keeps killing my throat. They were in a dark corner, quite out of the track of passengers. Oliver saw but too plainly that resistance would be of no avail. He held out his hand, which Nancy clasped tight in hers.
give me the other.
Said Sykes, seizing Oliver's unoccupied hand.
Here, Bullseye.
Oh, wait, I'd already started this chapter and I am a schmuck, but someone just joined, so it's all right. The dog looked up and growled.
See here, boy.
Putting his other hand to Oliver's throat.
If he speaks ever so soft a word, hurt him, d'ye mind?
The dog growled again, licking his lips, eyed Oliver as if he were anxious to attach himself to his windpipe without delay.
He's as willing as a Christian, strike me blind if he isn't.
Said Sykes, regarding the animal with a kind of grim and ferocious approval.
Now you get what you expect, master, so call away as quick as you like. The dog will soon stop that game. Get on, young'un.
Bullseye wagged his tail in acknowledgment of this unusually endearing form of speech, and giving vent to another admonitory growl for the benefit of Oliver, led the way onward. It was Smithfield that they were crossing, although he might have been Ross Werner Square for anything Oliver knew to the contrary. The night was dark and foggy. The lights in shops could scarcely struggle through the heavy mist, which thickened every moment and shrouded the houses and streets in gloom, rendering the same place still stranger in Oliver's eyes, making him making his uncertainty the more dismal and depressing. They had hurried on a few paces when a deep church bell struck the hour. With his first stroke, his two conductors stopped and turned their heads in the direction whence the sound proceeded.
Are you cook, Bill?
Said Nancy when the bell ceased.
What's the good of telling me? I can hear it, can't I?
Replied Sykes.
Well, wonder where they came,
said Nancy.
Of course they can,
Replied Sykes.
It was bottle me time when I was struck, and there wasn't a penny trumpet in the fair I couldn't hear the squeaking on. I was locked up for the night. The roundings in outside was mouldering old jail cells silent that I could almost have beat me head out against the iron plate of the door.
poor fellows.
Said Nancy, who still had her face towards the quarter in which the bell had sounded.
Oh, Bill, such fine young chaps as them.
Yes, that's what all women think.
As answered Sykes.
Fine young chaps. Well, Grigwood is dead, so it don't matter.
With this conclusion, Mr. Sykes appeared to repress a rising tendency to jealousy, and clasping Oliver's wrist more firmly, told him to step out again.
Wait a minute,
said the girl.
I wouldn't hurry, boy, if it was you that was coming out to be hung the next time 8 o'clock struck, Bill. I walked round and round the place till I dropped. The full snow was on the ground and I hadn't a soul to cover me.
And what good was that do?
Inquired the unsentimental Mr. Sykes.
Unless you could pitch over a fire 20 yards of good stout rope, you might as well be walking 50 mile off or not walking at all, for all the good would do me. Come on with you and don't stand preaching there.
The girl burst into a laugh, drew her shawl more closely round her, and they walked by. But Oliver felt her hand tremble, and looking up in her face as they passed a gas lamp, saw that it turned deadly white. They walked on, little frequented and dirty ways, for a full half hour, meeting very few people, and those appearing from their looks to hold much of the same position in society as Mr. Sykes himself. At length they turned into a very narrow street, full of old clothes shops, the dog running forward as if conscious that there was no further occasion for keeping on his guard, stopped before the door of a shop that was closed and apparently untenanted. The house was in ruinous condition, and the door was a nail and board, imitating that it was to let, which looked as if it had hung there for many years.
All right,
Cried Sykes, glancing cautiously about. I hate Sykes. I really hate Bill Sykes. Another illustration, though. I guess his reunion with all the other street rats, which is really dope. I don't think it's actually fair to call them street rats, but it's like 19th century, and I'm already out here being forced to talk smack about my own people because of this book. Jew pride, y'all. Happy Passover 2020. I unfortunately don't know what year it is in Hebrew, but if you want to tell me in the comments, I appreciate it. Seaweed, make me happy. Nancy stooped below the shutters. Oliver heard the sound of a bell. They crossed to the opposite side of the street and stood for a few moments under a lamp. A noise, as if a sash window were gently raised, was heard, and soon afterwards the door softly opened. Mr. Sykes then seized the terrified boy by the collar with very little ceremony, as if all three were quickly inside the house. This passage was perfectly dark. They waited while the person who had let them in chained and barred the door. Anybody
here?
inquired Sykes.
No,
Replied a voice which Oliver thought he had heard before.
Is the Odin here?
yes,
Replied the voice.
and Precious down in the mouth of his bin. Will he be glad to see you? Oh no.
The style of reply, as well as the voice which delivered it, seemed familiar to Oliver's ears, but it was impossible to distinguish even the form of the speaker in the darkness.
Let's have a game, said Sykes. Or we shall go breaking our necks or training the dog. Look after your legs if you do, that's all.
Stand a moment and I'll get you on,
replied the voice. The receding footsteps of the speaker were heard, and in another minute the form of Mr. John Dawkins, otherwise the Artful Dodger, appeared. He bore in his right hand a tallow candlestick in the end of the cleft stick. The young gentleman did not stop to bestow any other mark of recognition upon Oliver than a humorous grin, but turning away beckoned the visitors to follow him down a flight of stairs. They crossed an empty kitchen, and opening the door of a low, earthly smelling room, which seemed to have been built in a small backyard, were received with a shout of laughter.
Oh, more wig,
Cried Mr. Charles Bates, for whom lungs the laughter had proceeded.
Here it is. Oh, cry, here it is. For Fagin, look at him. Fagin, do look at him. I can bear it. Such a jolly game, I can bear it. Hold me, somebody, while I have it out.
Oh my god, I just realized that guy's supposed to be Fagin. I am kind of mad that this is Fagin. I know everyone's supposed to be like really, really like overly dramatized, but yeah. The other kids look so distorted and crazy. Oliver just kind of looked normal. Oh, come on. No, resist the seaweed. You are better than the weed, Tyler. Shaggy. Ah. I love seaweed. 420, baby. With this irrepressible ebullition of mirth, Master Bates laid himself flat on the floor and kicked convulsively for 5 minutes in an ecstasy of facetious joy. Then, jumping to his feet, He snatched the cleft stick from the Dodger, and, advancing to Oliver, viewed him round and round, while the Jew, taking off his nightcap, made a great number of low bows to the bewildered boy. The artful, meantime, who was rather saturnine disposition, and seldom gave way to merriment when it interfered with business, rifled Oliver's pockets with steady assurity.
Look at these dogs, Fagin,
said Charlie, putting the light so close to his new jacket that was nearly to set him on fire.
Look at his dogs. Super fine cloth and very well cut. Oh my, what a game. And his books too. Nothing but a gentleman, Fagin.
Oh, I hate myself for doing this to Fagin, but he's obviously a joke-ass character, or they would not have drawn him like that. Oh my god, I feel like my voices are accurate looking at these pictures. Delighted to see you looking so well, my dear, said the Jew, bowing with mock humility. Ugh, gross, sorry. um, Delighted to see you looking so well, my dear, said the Jew, bowing with mock humility. The artful shall give you another suit, my dear, for fear you shall spoil that Sunday one. Why didn't you write, my dear, and say you were coming? We'd have got something warm for supper. At this, Master Bates roared again, so loud that Fagin himself relaxed, and even the Dodger smiled. But as the artful drew forth the £5 note at that instant, it is doubtful whether the sally or the discovery awakened his merriment.
Hello, what's that?
Inquired Sikes, stepping forward as the Jew seized the note.
It's mine, Fagin.
No, 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 my dear, said the Jew. Mine, Bill, mine. You shall have the books.
If it ain't mine,
said Bill Sikes, putting his hat with a determined air.
Mine and Nancy's that is. I'll take your boy back again.
The Jew started. Oliver started too, though from a very different cause, for he hoped that the dispute might really end with his being taken back.
Go and hand over with you.
This is hardly fair, Bear. This is hardly fair, Bill. Hardly fair. Is it, Nancy? Inquired the Jew.
Fair or not, retorted Sikes. Hand it over, I tell you. Dear no Nancy, and he's got nothing else to do with our precious time but to spend it in scouting order and kidnapping every young boy he gets grabbed through. Give it here, you always old skeleton. Give it here.
He's an avaricious old skeleton. That's about the best insult I've heard so far, and that's a good one. I love some of the 19th century insults that they come up with, though. Avaricious old skeleton. That's going in the chat. With this general remonstrance, Mr. Sikes plucked the note from between the Jew's finger and thumb, and looking the old man coolly in the face, folded it up small and tied it in his neckerchief.
As for some of the trouble, said Sikes, you're not half enough either. You might keep the books if you're fond of reading. You needn't sell 'em.
You're very pretty,
said Charlie Bates, who with his sundry grimaces had been affecting to read one of the volumes in question.
Beautiful writing, isn't it, Oliver?
At the sight of the dismayed look with which Oliver regarded his tormentors, Master Bates, who was blessed with a lively sense of the ludicrous, fell into another ecstasy more boisterous than the first.
They belong to the old gentleman,
said Oliver, wriggling his hands.
She's a kind, good old gentleman who took me into his house and hid me nursed when I was dying of a fever. Oh, pray send him back. Send back your books and the money. Keep me here all my life long, but pray send him back. He'll think I stole him. The old lady, all of 'em who were so kind to me, will think I stole him. Oh, do have mercy upon me and send him back.
I'm an hour and a half in. Oh, yes. Oh, boy. With these words, which were uttered with all the energy and passionate grief, Oliver fell upon his knees at the Jew's feet and beat his hands together in perfect desperation. Oh,
I'm a seaweed addict.
I don't even care that y'all are watching me lick my fingers and stuff because I'm barely licking my fingers. I'm really just kind of trying to get the little pieces of salt and sesame off the tips of them. Just out of decency. I shouldn't be licking my hands and playing with the library book.
Charles Dickens, boy between your blending stream, we'll be back as you blooming every. She shines your right, but is what a mediocre man indeed. Indeed. Your voices of these are quite terrible. People have been tuning in for some reason. Oh, I don't know what's wrong with him. I think he's got the cheeseburgers. Oh, you mean the Asperger's? He's for me. I wouldn't doubt it. He's quite an odd character. Blimey, that was fast. I hope he's not coming over here. I don't want to deal with him either.
Baby. Leggy Bob. I am Fagin. I am Fagin. I am Fagin. I am Fagin, and I do not like idle children at all. Unless they make me money when they're small. I give out. I give out. I give out. But the thing for Passover that these crazy characters, eh? What is he doing taking so long for?
Oh, you know, bloody know. He doesn't need this much time. Who drinks walk up to tea a day anyway? Oh, this is someone who's doing terrible, terrible voices. Blimey.
Woo. Okay then. The boy's right, remarked Fagin, covering round and knitting his shaggy eyebrows into a hard knot. You're right, Oliver, you're right, and they'll think you stole from him, chuckled the Jew, rubbing his hands. It couldn't have happened better if we had chosen our time,
No, of course he couldn't,
replied Sykes.
I knows that directly I seen him coming through Clerkenwell with books under his arm. It's all right enough. He's soft-hearted psalm singers, or they wouldn't have taken him in it all, and they'll have no questions for him for fear they should be obliged to prosecute, so him get lagged. He's safe enough.
Oh, I hate his voice. Oh yeah, I keep getting just like one or two viewers at a time, and they're tuning off pretty quick, and it's all right. So the chat's just gonna be for whoever's watching this later. Um, it's kind of funny. Not really. I guess if I said it was kind of funny, that would be more appropriate. Jeez. Let me see something. Okay, I think I've got a good idea for my stopping point, but I'm going to see how my voice feels at the end of this chapter. We might be able to get through 2 more chapters. Oliver looked from one to the other, while these words were being spoken as if he were bewildered and could scarcely understand what passed. But Bill Sykes concluded. He jumped suddenly to his feet and tore wildly from the room, uttering shrieks for help, which made the bare old house echo to the roof.
Keep back the door, Bill,
cried Nancy, springing before the door and closing it as the Jew and his 2 pupils darted out in pursuit.
Keep back the door, you tear your boy to pieces.
Serve him right,
cried Sykes, struggling to disengage himself from the girl's grasp.
Stand off from me, or I'll spit your head against the wall.
I don't care for that, Bill. I don't care for that,
screamed the girl, struggling violently with the man.
So I shan't be drawn out of the dog unless you kill me first.
Shotty, said Sykes, setting his teeth fiercely.
I'll soon do that if you don't keep off.
The housebreaker flung the girl from him to the further end of the room, just as the Jew and the 2 boys returned, dragging Oliver among them.
What's the matter here?
said Fagin, looking round. What's the matter here? said Fagin, looking round.
I think she's gone mad,
replied Sykes savagely.
No, she hasn't,
said Nancy, pale and breathless from the scuffle.
No, she hasn't, Fagin. Don't think it.
Then keep quiet, will you? said the Jew with a threatening look.
No, I won't do that neither,
replied Nancy, speaking very loud.
Come, what do you think of us?
Mr. Fagin was sufficiently well acquainted with the manners and customs of that particular species of humanity to which Nancy belonged to feel tolerably certain that it would rather be unsafe to prolong any conversation with her at present. With the view of diverting the attention of the company, he turned to Oliver. What did you want to get away, my dear, did you? said the Jew, taking up a jacket and knotted club which lay by the fireplace. Eh? Oliver made no reply, but he watched the Jew's motions and breathed quickly. Waited to get assistance, called for the police, did you? sneered the Jew, catching the boy by the arm. We'll kill you at that, my young master. The Jew inflicted a smart blow on Oliver's shoulders with the club and was raising it for a second when the girl, rushing forward, wrestled it from his hand, She flung it into the fire with a force that brought some of the glowing coals whirling out into the room.
Well done, boy, see it done, Fagin,
Cried the girl.
You've got your boy. What more would you have? Leave him be, let him be, or I shall put that mark of some on you, and that will bring me to the gallows before my time.
The girl stamped her foot violently on the floor as she vented this threat, and with her lips compressed and her hands clenched, looked alternately at the Jew and at the other robber, her face colorless with passion of rage into which she had gradually worked herself. "Why, Nancy," said the Jew in a soothing tone after pausing, during which he and Mr. Sikes had stared at one another in disconcerted manner. You're more clever than ever tonight. My dear, you are acting beautifully,
Hey, boy,
said the girl.
take care I don't overdo it. You will be the worse for it, Fagin, if I do, and she'll tell you in good time keep care of me.
There is something about a roused woman, especially if she add to all her other strong passions the fierce impulses of recklessness and despair, in which few men like to provoke. The Jew saw that it would be hopeless to effect any further mistake regarding the as if to hint that he was the fittest person to pursue the dialogue. Mr. Sikes, thus mutely appealed to and possibly feeling his personal pride and influence, interested in the immediate reaction of Miss Nancy to give reason, give utterance about a couple of score of curses and threats, the rapid production of which reflected great credit on the fertility of his intervention. As they were produced no effect visibly on the object against whom they were discharged, however, he was resorted to more tangible arguments.
What do you mean by this?
Said Sikes, backing up the inquiry with a very common imprecation concerning of the most beautiful of human features, which, if it were heard above only once out of every 50,000 times that it is uttered below, would render blindness common a disorder as measles.
What do you mean by it? Very more, Potty. You know who you are, what you are.
Oh, yes, I know all about it,
replied the girl, laughing hysterically and shaking her head from side to side with a poor assumption of indifference. "We'll keep quiet then," rejoined Sikes with a growl that he was accustomed to use when addressing the dog,
"or I'll quiet you for a good long time."
Okay, I'm gonna let this dog out real quick. Yes, Stinky Dog. How's it coming to let you out? Oh boy. BRB. That's not a good sound at all. Oh boy. Ah, yes.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
I'm back and I'm Baroque. Never mind. Never mind. Never mind. Never mind. Never mind. Okay. Now I just have to remember where I left off. Boy, really thought I'd be through with more than 3 chapters of this by now. I thought I was getting a little faster with the reading. The girl laughed again, even less composedly than before, and darting a hasty look at Sykes, said the Jew, appealing to him in a remonstratory tone, and motioning toward the boys, who were eagerly attentive to all that passed. "We must have civil words, Bill."
Civil words,
cried the girl, whose passion was frightful to see.
civil words, you villain. Yes, you deserve them from me. What they for you when I was a child, not half as old as this.
Pointing to Oliver.
I've been in the same trade and the same service for 12 years since. Don't you know it? Speak out if you know it.
Hi, puppy. Yes. Beautiful dogs. I am handsome and deserve attention.
I am a pretty young girl.
That was funny, Phoebe.
You're a nice one.
That is, oh,
Civil words, you villain. Yes, you deserve it from me. I tried for you when I was a child, not half as old as this.
pointing to Oliver.
I've been in the same trade and the same service for 12 years since. Don't you know it? Speak out, don't you know it?
Well, well, replied the Jew with an attempt at pacification.
And if you have, it's your living.
Why, it is.
Returned the girl, not speaking but pouring out the words in one continuous and vehement scream.
It's my living and the cold, wet, dirty streets of my home. And you're that wretch that drove me to them long ago, and that'll keep me here, day and night till I die.
I shall do you a mischief, interposed the Jew, goaded by these reproaches. A mischief worse than that if you say much more. The girl said nothing more, but tearing her hair and dress in a transport of frenzy made such a rush as the Jew would probably have left signal marks of her revenge upon him, had not her wrist been seized by Sikes at the right moment, upon which she made a few ineffectual struggles and fainted.
She's all right now,
Says Sikes, laying her down in a corner.
she's uncommon strong in the arms when she's up in this way.
The Jew wiped his forehead and smiled, as if it were a relief to have the disturbance over. But neither he, nor Sikes, nor the dog, nor the boys seemed to consider it in any other light than a common occurrence incidental to business. It's the waste of having to do with women, said the Jew, replacing his club. But they're clever, and we can't get on in our line without 'em, Charlie. Shoo Oliver to bed.
I suppose he'd better now wear his best clothes tomorrow, faggin' haggy,
replied Charlie Bates.
Certainly not.
Certainly not, replied the Jew, reproaching the grin with which Charlie put the question. Master Bates, apparently much delighted in his commission, took the cleft stick and led Oliver into an adjacent kitchen, where he sat. There were 2 or 3 beds on which he had slept before, and here, with many uncontrollable bursts of laughter, he produced an identical old suit of clothes which Oliver had been so much congratulated himself upon leaving at Mr. Brownlow's, at the accidental display of which to Fagin, by the Jew who purchased them, had been very first clue received of his whereabouts.
Pull off the smart one, said Charlie, and I'll give him the faggin' to take care of. What fun it is!
Poor Oliver unwillingly complied. Master Bates, rolling up in new clothes under his arm, departed from the room, leaving Oliver in the dark and locking the door behind him. The noise of Charlie's laughter and the voice of Miss Betsy, who opportunely arrived to throw water over her friend and to perform other feminine offices for the promotion of her recovery, might have kept many people awake under more happy circumstances than those in which Oliver was placed. But he was sick and weary, and he soon fell sound asleep. So chapter 17 is called Oliver's Destiny Continuing Uproarious Brings a Great Man to London to Injure His Reputation. Guys, just give me a minute. I'm going to get some tea because I made up a 4th thing of tea with the same leaves because I am that cheap. I'm cheap. Also, I'm out of seaweed. I'm going to wash my hands, get seaweed.
Oh boy. no, 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 no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Om that new meow make commercial is lit. Cattle food, yeah, yeah, yeah. Cattle food, yeah. Cattle food, yeah. Now we're gonna get more food. We don't even have a cat. Dog don't need more food. But she's so cute though. She's always drinking cute though. Oh. I'm gonna put some honey in this. Yeah, fuck honey. Hey, we got time, don't you worry, lady. Baby, we got time. Whoa, dang, whoa, dang, dang, whoa, dang. Wu-Tang ain't nothing to mess with. Wu-Tang ain't nothing to mess with. Wu-Tang ain't nothing to mess with. Sean step inside the room, Dr. Doom, prepare for the boom. Bam, slam, yes I am kicking up dust and I don't give a goddamn. The lyrical murderer, about to get filthy. Let me stop. Actually, I'm gonna get my tea real quick. I'm silly for not. Yeah. Son of a biscuit eating bulldog. French toast. You are a kid and you lit a liquor. Okay, so I think this next chapter isn't going to take me as long as some of these other ones have. So I'm just going to go ahead and try and read through it. Zoinks! Oh boy, so I guess I'm going to do one more chapter. Call it a day, because this is just starting to hurt my throat trying to do Sykes' voice, especially. But we are on chapter 17. Oliver's destiny, continuing unproprietous, brings a great man to London to injure his reputation. It is the custom on this stage in all good murderous melodramas to present the tragic and comic scenes in a regular alternation, as the layers of red and white in the side of a squeaky, well-cured bacon, the hero sinks upon his straw bed, true and her life alike in danger, drawing forth her dagger to preserve the one at the cost of the other.
And just as our expectations are wrought up to the highest pitch, the whistle is heard, and we are straightway transported to the great hall of the castle, where a gray-headed Sensical sings a funny chorus with a funnier body of vassals who are free from all sorts of places from the church vaults to places and roam about in a company caroling perpetually. Such changes appear absurd, but they are not so unnatural as they would seem at first sight. The transitions in real life from well spread boards to deathbeds and from mourning weeds to holiday garments are not a whit less startling, only there we are busy actors instead of passive lookers on, which makes a vast difference. The actors in the mimic life of the theatre are blind and violent transactions and abrupt impulses of passion or feeling, which are presented before the eyes of mere spectators and are at once condemned as outrageous and preposterous. As sudden shiftings of the scene and rapid changes of time and place are not only sanctioned in books by long usage, but are by many considered the great art of authorship, and author's skill in his craft being by such critics chiefly estimated with relation to the dilemmas in which he leaves his characters at the end of every chapter, this brief introduction to the present one may perhaps deem unnecessary. If so, I'll let it be considered a delicate imitation on the part of the historian that he is going back directly to the town in which Oliver Twist was born, the reader taking it for granted that they are good and substantial reasons for making the journey, or he would not be invited to proceed upon such an expedition on any account. Mr. Bumble emerged at early morning from the warehouse gate and walked, with portly carriage and commanding steps, up the high street. He was full of broom and pride of beetlehood. His cocked hat and coat were dazzling in the morning sun, and he clutched his cane with the vigorous tenacity of health and power. Mr. Bumble always carried his head high, but this morning it was higher than usual. There was an abstraction in his eye, an elevation in his air, which might have warned an observant stranger that thoughts were passing in the beetle's mind too great for utterance. One sec. Oh boy. Oh, that's wonderful. Mr. Bumble stopped not to converse with the small shopkeepers and others who spoke to him differently as he passed along. He merely returned their salutations with a wave of his hand and a relaxed nod in its dignified pace until he reached the farm where Mrs. Mann tended the infant paupers with parochial care. Uh,
Drat that beetle,
said Mrs. Mann, hearing the well-known shackling at the garden gate. If it isn't
if it isn't him this time in the morning, Lock, Mr. Bumble only think it's begin you. Well, dear me, it is a pleasure it is. Come into the parlour, sir, please.
The first sentence was addressed to Susan, and the exclamations delight were uttered to Mr. Bumble as the good lady unlocked the garden gate and shewed him with great attention and respect to the house.
Mrs. Mann,
Said Mr. Bumble, not sitting upon or dropping himself into a seat as any commonplace jackanapes would, but letting himself gradually and slowly down into the chair.
Mrs. Mann, good morning.
Well, good morning to you, sir,
replied Mrs. Mann with many smiles, and hoping
to find yourself well, sir.
So, replied the beetle. Broccoli off is not a bed of roses, Mrs. Mann.
Indeed it isn't, Mr. Bumble,
rejoined the lady, and all the infant paupers might have caroused the rejoinder with great propriety if they had heard it.
Broccoli off, ma'am,
continued Mr. Bumble, striking the table with his cane,
is your worrit in vexation in hardihood, but no public characters, as I may say, must suffer prosecution.
Mrs. Man, not knowing very well what the bumble meant, raised her hands with a look of sympathy and sighed.
Oh, you may sure well, Miss Man,
Said the beetle. Finding she had done right, Mrs. Man sighed again, evidently to the satisfaction of being the public character who, repressing a complacent smile by sternly looking at his cocked hat, said,
Mrs. Man, I'm going to London.
Look, Mr. Bumble,
cried Mrs. Man, striking back.
To London, ma'am,
Resumed the inflexible beetle.
by coach, already two, and two paupers. Mrs. Man, a legal action is coming on about his settlement, and the board has appointed me, Mrs. Man, to dispose to the matter before the Court of Sessions at Clerkenwell, and I very much question,
Added Mr. Bumble, drawing himself up,
whether the Clerkenwell Sessions will not find themselves in the wrong box before they must have done with me.
oh, you mustn't be too hard upon him, sir,
said Mrs. Man coaxingly.
The Clerkenwell Sessions have brought it upon themselves, ma'am,
Replied Mr. Bumble.
and the Clerkenwell Sessions Friday came off rather worse than expected. The Clerkenwell Sessions have only themselves to thank.
There was so much determination and depth of purpose about the menacing manner in which Mr. Bumble delivered himself of these words that Mrs. Man appeared quite awed by them. At length she said,
you're going by coach, sir. I thought it was unusual to send you in the bumper carts.
That's when they're ill, Mrs. Mon,
replied the beetle.
We put the sick paupers into open carts in the rainy weather to prevent their taking cold.
Oh,
Said Mrs. Man.
The opposition coach contracts for these two and takes them cheap.
Said Mr. Bumble.
They are both in a very low stature, and we find it would come £2 cheaper to move them than to bury them. That is, if we can throw them upon another parish, which I think we shall be able to do, if they don't die upon the road to spite us. Ha, ha, ha.
When Mr. Bumble had laughed a little while, his eyes again encountered the cocked hat, and he became grave.
We're forgetting business, ma'am,
said the beetle.
Here is your parochial stipend for the month.
Mr. Bumble produced some silver money rolled up in the paper from his pocketbook and requested a receipt, which Mrs. Man wrote.
it is much blotted, sir,
Said the
to you, I'm sure.
Mr. Bumble nodded blandly in acknowledgment of Mrs. Man's curtsy and inquired how the children were.
Bless your dear little hearts,
said Mrs. Man with emotion.
they're as well as they can be as it is. Of course, except the two that died last week, you little dick.
Is the boy no better?
inquired Mr. Bumble. Mrs. Man shook her head.
Is ill conditioned, which is bad disposed patriarchal child at that.
Oh boy, I'm messing up. That was Bumble.
He's an ill-conditioned, wishes, bad disposed, parochial child, that,
said Mr. Bumble, angry.
Where is he?
I'll bring him to you one moment, sir,
replied Mrs. Man.
Oh, Dick.
I have to put this down for 2 seconds and attend to the barking dog. So, oh, BRB again. It'll literally be a second, and I apologize. Come on, workers. That's easy. That's good, dogs. Oh boy, apologies. I'm losing all my energy. I'm not even doing anything funny off screen anymore. And the one time, I'm sure people are going to think I said the N word, but it's okay because I sure did not. And that is just a fact. I'm like really against that word at this point in my life. I just love all the music that uses it. So I'll usually just be like, there's something with it. Yeah, that's my. But let me just find where I was. After some calling, Dick was discovered. Having had his face under the pump and dried upon Mrs. Mann's gown, he was led into the awful presence of Mr. Bumble the Beetle. The child was pale and thin, his cheeks were sunken, and his eyes large and bright. The scanty Paris dress, the livery of his misery, hung loosely on his feeble body, and his young limbs had wasted away like those of an old man. Such was the little being who stood trembling beneath Mr. Bumble's glance, not daring to lift his eyes from the floor, and dreading to hear the beetle's voice.
Can't you look at the gentleman, you obstinate boy?
Said Mrs. Mann. The child meekly raised his eyes and encountered those of Mr. Bumble.
What's the matter with you, poor Uncle Dick?
Required Bumble with a well-timed jocularity.
Nothing, sir,
Replied the child faintly.
I should think not,
Said Mrs. Mann, who had, of course, laughed very much at Mr. Bumble's humor.
You want for nothing, I'm sure.
What should you like? Faltered the child.
Here, day.
Imposed Mrs. Mann.
I suppose we're going to have to say you do want for something now. Why, you little wretch?
Stop, Mrs. Mann, stop,
said the beetle, raising his hand with a shoe of authority.
Like what, sir, eh?
What should like?
Faltered the child.
That if somebody can write, would put a few words down for me on a piece of paper and fold it up in series and keep it for me after I'm laid into the ground.
Why, what does that boy mean?
Exclaimed Mr. Bumble, on whom the earnest manner and wan aspect of the child had made some impression, accustomed as he was to such things. Ooh, regular words are killing me. I'm very happy that I'm almost done here.
What do you mean, sir?
What should you like? Said the child.
To leave my dear love to draw over a twist, and to let him know how often I sat by myself and cried to think of his wandering about in the dark nights with nobody to help him. And I should like to tell him,
said the child, pressing his small hands together and speaking with great fervor,
that I was glad to die when I was very young, for perhaps if I had lived to be a man and hadn't grown old, my little sister who is in heaven might forget me or be unlike me, and it would be so much happier if we were both children there together.
Oh, come on, kid. It's not a depressing enough book. Mr. Bumble surveyed the little speaker from head to foot with indescribable astonishment, and turning to his companion, said,
There only one story, Mrs. Munn, that outdaces Oliver has demoralized him all.
I couldn't believe it, sir,
said Mrs. Mann, holding her hands and looking generally malignantly at Dick.
I've never seen such a hard little wretch.
Take him away, ma'am, said Bumble impetuously. He must be started to the board, Mrs. Munn.
I hope the gentleman will understand that it isn't my fault, sir,
said Mrs. Mann, whimpering pathetically.
I shall understand that, ma'am, and I shall be quite of which the state of the true case,
said Mr. Bumble.
Take him away, I can't bear the sight of him.
Dick was taken away and locked up in the coal cellar. Mr. Bumble shortly afterwards took himself off to prepare for his journey, At 6 o'clock in the morning, Mr. Bumble, having exchanged his cocked hat for a round one, and encased his person in a blue green coat with a cape to it, took his place on the outside of the coach, accompanied by the criminals whose settlement was disputed, with whom in due course of time he arrived in London. He experienced no other crosses on the way than those which originated in the perverse behavior of the two paupers who persisted in shivering and complaining of the cold, in a matter which Mr. Bumble declared caused his teeth to chatter in his head and made him feel quite uncomfortable, although he had a great coat on. Having disposed of the evil-minded persons for the night, Mr. Bumble sat himself down in the house at which the coach had stopped, and took a temperate dinner of steaks, oyster sauce, and porter. Putting a glass of hot gin and water on the chimney piece, he drew his chair to the fire, and with sundry moral reflections on the too prevalent sin of discontent and complaining, composed himself to read the paper. The very first paragraph upon which Mr. Bumble's eyes rested was the following advertisement: 5 guineas reward. Whereas a young boy named Oliver Twist absconded or was enticed on Thursday evening last from his home at Pentonville and has not been seen or heard of since. The above reward will be paid to any person who will give such information as will lead to the discovery of the said Oliver Twist, or tend to throw any light upon his previous history, in which the advertiser is, for many reasons, warmly interested. And then followed a full description of Oliver's dress, person, appearance, and disappearance, with the name and address of Mr. Brownlow at full length. Mr. Bumble opened his eyes, read the advertisement slowly and carefully several times. Why three several times? I need a Dickens scholar to come out here and explain some of this stuff to me, I swear. But three several times, and in something more than 5 minutes, was on his way to Pentonville, having actually, in his excitement, left the glass of hot gin and water untasted.
Is Mr. Brownlow at home?
Inquired the Bumble of a girl who opened the door. To this inquiry, the girl returned the not uncommon but rather evasive reply of,
"Oh, now, now, where do you come from?"
Mr. Bumble no sooner uttered Oliver's name in explanation of his errand than Mrs. Bedwin, who had been listening at the parlor door, hastened into the passage with a breathless state.
Come in,
said the old lady.
"I know he's a hair of import, dear, right now, he should, I was certain of it. Bless his heart, I've said so all along."
Having said this, the worthy old lady hurried back to the parlor again, and seating herself on a sofa, burst into tears. The girl, who was not quite so susceptible, had run upstairs meanwhile, and now returned in such a request that Mr. Bumble would follow her immediately, which he did. He was shown into the little back study, where sat Mr. Brownlow and his friend Mr. Grimwig, with decanters and glasses before them. The latter gentleman at once burst into the exclamation,
A beadle, a parish beadle, oh, hit my head. Pray don't interrupt just now, said Mr. Brownlow. Take a seat, will you?
Mr. Bumble sat himself down, quite confounded by the oddity of Mr. Grimwig's manner. Mr. Bumble moved the lap so as to obtain his uninterrupted view of the beadle's countenance, and said with little impatience,
Now, sir, you've come in consequence of having seen the advertisement. Yes, sir, said Mr. Bumble. And you are a beetle, are you not?
inquired Mr. Grimwig.
I am the pro-archical beetle, gentlemen,
rejoined Mr. Bumble proudly.
Of course,
said Mr. Grimwig aside to his friend.
I knew he was
Of course, observed Mr. Grimwig aside to his friend.
I knew he was a beetle all over.
Mr. Brownlow gently shook his hand to impose silence on his friend and resumed.
Do you know where this poor boy is now? No more than nobody, replied Mr. Bumble. Well, what do you know of him? Inquired the old gentleman. Speak out, my friend, if you have anything to say. What do you know of him? You don't happen to know of any good of him, do you? Said Mr. Grimwig caustically, after an attentive perusal of Mr. Bumble's features. Mr. Bumble, catching the inquiry very quickly, shook his head with portentous solemnity. You see, said Mr. Grimwig, looking triumphantly at Mr. Brownlow. Mr. Brownlow looked apprehensively at Mr. Bumble's pursed-up countenance, and requested him to communicate what he knew regarding Oliver in as few words as possible. Mr. Bumble put down his hat, unbuttoned his coat, folded his arms, inclined his head in a retrospective manner, and after a few moments' reflection commenced his story. It would be tedious if given in the beetle's words, occupying as it did some 20 minutes of telling, but the sum and substance of it was that Oliver was born of low and vicious parents, that he had from his birth displayed no better qualities than treachery, ingratitude, and malice, that he had terminated his brief career in the place of his birth by making a sanguinary and cowardly attack on an unoffending lad and running away in the night time from his master's house. In proof of his really being the person he represented himself, Mr. Bumble laid upon the table the papers he had brought to town, and folded his arms again, awaited for Mr. Brownlow's observations. All too true, said the old gentleman sorrowfully after looking over the papers. This is not much of your intelligence, but I would gladly have given you treble the money if it had been favourable to the boy. It is not at all improbable that if Mr. Bumble had been possessed of this information at an earlier period in the interview, he might have imparted a very different coloring into his little history. It was too late to do now, however, so he shook his head gravely, and, pocketing the 5 guineas, withdrew. You're a dick, Bumble Beetle. Mr. Barlow paced the room to and fro for several minutes, evidently so much disturbed by the beetle's tale that even Mr. Grinwig forbore to vex him further. At length he stopped and rang a bell violently. Mrs. Bedwin, said Mr. Brownlow when the housekeeper appeared, that boy Oliver is an impostor.
It can't be, sir. It cannot be,
said the old lady energetically. I'll tell you he is, retorted the old gentleman. And what do you mean by can't be? Oh, we've just heard a full account of him from his birth, and he has been a thorough-paced little villain all his life. Yes, I see the end of the chapter.
I never will believe it, sir,
replied the old lady firmly.
Never.
You old women never believe anything but quack doctors and lying storybooks, growled Mr. Grimwig. I knew it all along. Why didn't you take my advice from the beginning? You would if you hadn't had a fever, I suppose, eh? Is it interesting, wasn't he? Interesting? Bah! And Mr. Grimwig poked the fire with a flourish.
He was a dear, grateful, gentle child, sir,
retorted Mrs. Bedwin indignantly.
I know what children are, sir. I have done these 40 years, and people who can't say the same shouldn't say anything about him. It's my opinion.
This was a hard hit for Mr. Grimwig, who was a bachelor. As if extorted nothing from the gentleman but a smile, the old lady tossed her head and smoothed down her apron preparatory to another speech when she was stopped by Mr. Brownlow. Silence, said the old gentleman, feigning an anger he was far from feeling. Never let me hear the boy's name again. I rang to tell you that. Never, never on any pretence, mind. You may leave the room, Mrs. Bedwin. Remember, am in earnest. There were sad hearts at Mr. Brownlow's that night. Oliver's heart sank with him when he thought of his good, kind friends. It was well for him that he could not know that they had heard, or it might have broken him outright. Which leads us to chapter 18, how Oliver passed his time in improving society of his reputable friends. So we're going to put a pin in that there on chapter 18, because 1 plus 8 is 9, and 9 is the number of completion. And also, I've been doing this for 2.5 hours and it hurts. So thank you so much for anybody who decided to stop by and take a peek today. We didn't have quite the audience base that we've been getting, and that's fine. But huge shout outs again to Fishy, DWC, Tom, Pink Snoop Dogg, Chris the Fresh, and Against the World G. Anyone who decides after the fact that they would like to subscribe, I don't always get the notifications. And honestly, on some channels, it won't even let me go to their channel for some reason. So that's what happened with Fishy's brother. Sorry about that, Fishy. I'm going to try and get back on there and sub to him today. Because like I said, I don't always get the notifications. But again, I really appreciate your time, effort, energy, and brain power. So do consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. You can also follow me on IG at